Many years ago, never thought there'd be something like this atomic energy, atomic building bombs. Nobody today, they don't even pay no attention. I think our little kids have to learn and tell them what it can do. Devastating thing in war. They could tell, like our people. Remember the old folks reading I'll read them, explain to them all the things that was in the Funny paper. They call it Buck Rogers newspaper. There's all them things. Planes that were going to come with a booming sound. And they also spoke about the booming sound on the ground, earth. Say that's going to be people all over the world will know. When it all came to, I think in 1945, all that came.
In the early 1940s, in a once remote section of Washington State, events took place that changed the world. As part of the Manhattan Engineering District, the lands around Hanford were utilized for the development of plutonium and other radioactive materials necessary for the development of nuclear weapons. Very little is known about the long-term impacts of those events, and although not as devastatingly dramatic as the experience of those in Japan, in many ways those people living around the Hanford site represent part of the ground zero of human experience with nuclear technology. In our modern world, many have heard about the events of Chernobyl, but few really know the stories about our homelands. This is a brief account of Indian people of the Columbia River and how Hanford operations have affected native ways of life in the past and will continue to affect them in the future.
But I always remember my grandma pointing out that this is where all the Indians used to live, in this area. Now they don't live here no more. No one lives here. She said they're all gone now.
My background is basically everything that drains into the Snake and or Columbia River, and so that drainage is who I am. That drainage. My mother is on this side and she's here. My father was here and their father was over here, and it begins to, I'm amazed at my background. It comes from the contributaries to the Snake and the Columbia on this side of the Cascades.
Yes, we're all one type of people. We all have the same customs. We all have the same manner of dress. We all have the same foods. We have the same ceremonies. And we travel around to the same places to gather food. And our languages are related.
To truly understand the impacts of Hanford on Columbia River Indian people, it is important to comprehend not only the technical and environmental history, but also the details of Indian people's way of life. To better view our experience, it is important to know who we are and how we lived.
But you see, the old Indian people, even though they belonged to families and had primary rights of ownership and residence in specific places, like, say, at Wallula or at Amatalam or Imatalam, nevertheless, they were intermarried. They had family in other places, so that it was part of the yearly round, you know, to go to Wayum or to Mount Adams or to go up into the Blue Mountains or Some people would travel up to Kettle Falls, which was in Salish territory, to get fish or to gamble.
We used to travel to Mount Adams to pick huckleberries. We'd have to camp along the river before we got there. And we drank out of the Columbia River. And we bathed and washed our dishes and everything. It was clean, very clean then.
We'd go down to Celilo and get our fish ourselves. Uncle Henry had a platform down there, and he'd go down and get it himself. Or we had uncles, Mom had uncles or cousins. She'd go down there and get fish from them. But somebody always had somebody down there fishing where you'd go down and get fish for them. But what you do is you traded. We'd trade them fish and bring them roots, or trade them fish and bring them dry meat, you know, whatever. Because a lot of times those families that stayed there and did all the fishing, that's all they did year-round. So they had no opportunity to go root digging or getting deer meat, elk.
For about 4 years or 3 years, I was fortunate to be raised the Indian way, you might say. My dad told me one time when I was about 4 or 5 years old, he says, "Where's your coat?" And he named all these items, so he brought them all together, and I didn't know what was going on. Put them in a basket or a sack, and went over and got a blanket and a couple of blankets and a sheet and a pillow, and he put it in. He says, "Go put it on a car." So I went and put it on a car. And then my grandmother came out, his mother. She didn't speak any English. I think she did, but she wouldn't. She was too proud to, yeah, and so we went over. Of course, I realized what was going on. You know, I'm going with her. That don't talk any English, you know. I was looking up at her. And we got someplace. Well, then she'd tell me, "Schmutek," you know, and I was wondering, I don't know what that is, you know, "Schmutek." She'd say it a couple of times, and then she'd grab me and drag me in a place where you had soap and water, and then she'd wash my face and wash my ears. And then, you know, and I didn't know what the hell that was either. We're going to eat. So she'd put me by the table and set me down, and I would eat. You know, so about 3 days later, I knew what schmutek was. Schmutek. So I'd go in there and wash my face, you know. And then, and then I knew what that was. We're going to eat. Now, Wunpan Kapu, you know, go get your coat. And then, of course, I didn't know what that was. She dragged me over there and give me my coat and then, you know, put it on.
And we gathered food all the time in the summer so that we'd have enough for the winter. In the summer we had fresh foods. In the winter we had dried foods because that was the way we processed everything.
We used to have a cow and we had our own milk. And my mother and them would churn our butter.
We ate white fish. We ate suckers. I remember my grandmother pounding them just really fine, and you wouldn't have to take the bones out. We ate suckers. We ate trout, fresh trout.
Well, there was not too much. That is, you know, canned foods. There was a lot of preserving in jars and stuff like that, and that came from the Indian school that was here. They taught that. They taught that preserving of food here, and so the women folk did a lot of canning and preserving food. So there was that, and a lot of drying. A lot of drying was done, like the roots. All of the roots were dried. The meats were dried. The salmons were dried. All of those foods were preserved because there was no electricity. No electricity. Not even any ice. I mean, by the time you got ice home to your ice box, it was all melted, you know. So it was just impractical. And like I said, there's just no electricity at all. I think it was probably well into the 40s before there was any electricity on this reservation.
Due to the sensitivity and secrecy of activities on the Hanford site, Life went on without many people knowing the details. People talked and questions were asked among themselves, but there were no answers.
I was born in 44, so it was about the year my grandpa died that I first heard of Hanford, and that was in 1950. I must have been, what, 4 or 5 years old? And I thought Hanford was a new place to go shopping.
In the late 40s, I was in grade school, and the impact never hit me until I grew up at a later time. But I do remember they were upset, the adults were upset. My father received 2 Pinto horses, and they were from his mother. And they didn't have many horses, and I knew that, and I couldn't understand why we got these horses. They could use them. Well, that's where they run, was on the Hanford Reach. They were tough. They must have been Cayuse descendant, because we tried to shoe that horse, and the guy that shoed him, you know, the second time, he says, you don't need shoes on these horses. So their hooves were different. Yeah. And so they run in that area, and we got those horses. But that's what I seen. You get everything out, move everything out.
Seemed like Hanford's, when they put in that nuclear waste or something, it really done away with all of the root digging places over there. That's where the people used to go from Umatilla to go digging.
You know, that was something, that was really something, because I never knew anything about Hanford. I never knew anything. I was oblivious, totally oblivious as to Hanford and what was going on over there. The thing that I remember was when I was a teenager that we went to Richland, and the reason we went to Richland was one of the first shopping centers in the Pacific Northwest. It was the first mall type of place.
When the U.S. government restricted access to lands around Hanford, it was but another impact to an already changing way of life. The direct effects of building a nuclear facility affected access, ancient trade, language, hunting, root gathering, and fishing. However, it is the direct environmental effects and the potential exposure to radioactive releases that continues to make people uncertain.
I don't have any family members that have cancer. I myself have thyroid. They think. They're going to test me again the first of the year, and I understand that's one of the problems.
But I went to the doctor in March. I had a growth. I kept feeling this on my neck, you know, and it kept getting bigger, so I went to the doctor, and he sent me to another doctor, and they did a scan, and it was like 3 milliliters. It was, you know, about the size of a pea, around the 1st of March, 2nd, somewhere. So I had to go back, and I was having trouble swallowing about the 18th of March, and it had doubled. And he thought it was like they tried to do to that, what's her name, Gore? Tried to extract, put a needle in, and thought it was all fluid, but it wasn't. It was a growth.
My sister, however, had 2 children she lost through tumors in the head, and they were cancerous. Other than that, I don't. And then my good relative and friend, Marge Allman, she had cancer, and she died from it.
More direct impacts have affected our traditional resources in the last century than ever before. During the early years of operations, the Hanford site released many millions of curies of radioactive materials such as plutonium, strontium, ruthenium, radioactive iodine, and others including chemicals and heavy metals into the air, the earth, and the Columbia River.
And we done some fish consumption surveys on the impacts of the users of the river and some of the fish we pulled out. The sturgeon, they had the sturgeon test fishery, and they had big growths on the side of their faces there. And they were caught below Wallula, where the pulp mill is. They were caught there, and they said well, these are bottom fish. And they think that it was created from this. And them days, we didn't have those kind of sicknesses to worry about on our fish. We never had the scars from the fish coming up, escaping through the other gill nets, or cuts from the dams, or anything of that sort. We had nice looking fish.
Natural resources and human health issues are a part of life on the Columbia River. Today there are many chemical challenges in our world, but the cumulative effects on the Columbia River has impacted the people and will continue into the future.
Heard how that river, from there on down to McNary Dam and some of those other dams, is one of the hottest rivers in the world because of runoffs from Hanford, from the mills that are located along the Columbia River there near Pasco. And we've been told by a lot of our elders the damage that it's doing. I've heard so many stories about how our people have contracted different types of diseases because our people consume so much more fish than the general public does.
I can remember being sent down to get your buckets of water out of the Columbia River, and we didn't very seldom packed our water from they said the one source. I think we had all the sources of water at that time. We didn't have no fears. When we fished, we were on the river. We always had a bucket there. When we wanted a drink of water, we'd take that bucket, throw it in, collect the water, and drink it with no fear. And that's when we had good, clean water them days.
It's filthy dirty now. I pity the poor salmon that have to live in that river. It's just filthy, filthy. You can even see it, you know, from the ground. It's dirty.
Well, you know, right there on, you know, we was watching them there on Lock Island when the fish come up there. You know, they're just sitting up there. There's little pools up there where I believe where they lay their eggs and stuff right in there. You know, that radiation is coming out right into where they're laying their eggs. You know, it's going to be kind of, what are we going to be eating here in the next, you know, 20 years or so? The fish coming up that we catch.
For many Indian peoples on the Columbia Plateau, the government-to-government relationship with the United States was established during the Treaty of 1855. As such, it is important that federal agencies such as the Department of Energy continue to work in partnership with the Indian people to develop solutions to many serious issues and co-manage the resources.
It's interesting, the very word for treaty in Sahaptin is as I know it in Umatilla, is pa'inichwat, which means an instrument or something to make it good, you know, to set things right, so that the very name for treaty was that it was focused on the here and now then, you know, to try to repair and restore relations.
There are still many obstacles, and education is needed to make changes to improve the long-term relationships between federal agencies and tribes.
I've felt when I've gone there for meetings a lot of times, we all have to be questioned about whether we're a United States citizen or where we come from and everything. And I say, here, we're the first ones that were on this part of the land.
If anybody is allowed to be there, it's the Indians. They're not going to hurt the land, you know, and yet we had to go through and wear that badge, and they call us a visitor. I was looking at that and I smiled, you know, visitor? Wow, Huh.
Our elders were directly affected by the events at Hanford, and our people continue to live with the impacts today. But it is the future we must look toward. The problems at Hanford and the threats to the Columbia River and our way of life are serious. The issues are very technical, and the problems will affect many generations into the future. So part of our challenge is that we must educate our children so that they can pick up where we leave off.
I don't know about our young people. You know, I'm just really worried about them that maybe 50 years from now they're not going to know anything about their way of life that used to be. That's one of my concerns, and I try to teach my children everything that I know, and my grandchildren. I teach them language at home. I teach them about their foods, and hopefully somehow Mother Earth will be cleaned up and our foods will be good and natural again someday.
Okay, you ever heard of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation?
No.
No?
Never heard of it. Well, I have, but I don't really know nothing about it.
No.
No? You don't want to?
No. Yeah, I never heard of Hanford nuclear system, whatever.
Never teach you about it at school?
Never even, teachers never said anything about it to me.
I think it's very important that the children, you know, our kids know about the radiation thing and what's going on out of here on they're burying things out here. They say it's just a little bit, you know, myself, I think a little bit is too much. It's already been there, you know, how many years it's been going through the river already, and it's not, you know, they're saying that it's not bothering anybody yet, but, you know, who knows? You know, we don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows what that radiation does to people.
For people was living, the old timers, they always said, people get careless. Some things will happen if you're careless.